introduce to you our speaker. If you don't know him already, you have missed out on some good previous episodes. But for those of you who don't know, David Teachout is a mental health therapist and photographer focused on and teaching how creativity intersects with mental flexibility. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attending a Bible college and receiving a bachelor's in theology and psychology. During his studies there, David deconverted. He has a master's in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology and is currently at work on a doctorate in clinical psychology. David has been actively working within the field of psychology as a therapist, social worker, advocate, and subject matter expert for over 15 years. In his spare time, which I don't know how there's any after all that, David enjoys reading a copious amount. Yes, reading is fun, both fiction and nonfiction, exploring perspective through photography, and he maintains a blog and podcast at lifeweavings.substack.com. David, welcome back to the show. We're so glad to have you. And you have read 110 books so far this year. You are beating me by a lot.
Yep. Yeah, I actually do one of those Goodreads challenges, and I always set it on.
Yes.
So
I follow you on there. My challenge is only 50 books, and I'm lagging behind, so I need to steal some of yours and catch up.
I will admit that probably a good 80% of them are fiction, which is a lot easier to read than nonfiction. So I will own it. But yeah, I don't care because I love fiction. So,
but are you
no one is judging
or are
you
audibling?
Some audible, but not as much. I can't do other things while listening to a fiction, like a book. So it's difficult to. If I'm just going to sit there, I'm going to read. So yeah,
that's fair. Yeah. I like it. It's hard to get that absorbed into nonfiction for me, anyway. Like
I mean, and frankly, I look at it as a professional service, because I'm here to facilitate rapport with my clients, and I have lost count the number of times that something I read from like pop culture or whatever came up in a session, or I made a reference to it, and they're like, I know that series. And then, we chat about the, inner workings of the characters and why they bond with them. And yeah, a lot of fun.
Great justification.
I have a lot of people interested in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series right now. So I'm thinking it is time to reread it for the 7th time. So yeah.
So does it count? Hypothetical question: if you're doing a reading challenge of 100 books and you read the same book twice during that year, does that count as 2 books?
I mean, as long as you read it. I mean, it's just yeah. Redwall, man, it's been ages since I read that series. Man, yeah.
Ooh, I think that was my first fantasy series that I read on my own.
Yeah, I think some of it may have been in 5th grade or so. I mean, I was reading Tolkien in 3rd grade. Although admittedly, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings came later, because Hobbit's a whole lot easier than Lord of the Rings. So there is that. But yeah. And certainly not the Silmarillion. Dear Lord.
I'm audibling the Silmarillion right now. Andy Serkis is reading it, so it's not too bad. But like if I have it on the background at work while I'm working, it's just stimulating enough that it's not too distracting, but also kind of boring enough that it's not too distracting.
Yeah. Well, was it? Oh, did you reference Words of Radiance, Brandon Sanderson? Is that what it was? Oh, okay. Never mind. All right. Clearly, we're going off field here. So
we are, but
what
that's
was I just saying before this, that we were going to there have been more than once where one of my presentations basically just was a extension of the show conversation. So
yeah, it happens.
It happens. You tend to do a running series, you can all your talks can kind of follow into its own
they do. Classes. I could self-reference
like the great classes you could do, or Skillshare. You could do every talk. You can do a presentation.
Yeah, that's why I started a Substack, because I'm just collating everything.
Right, exactly.
One. So. Yeah, that and all the cool kids are writing on Substack now.
We're here to talk about dualism, so let's do that.
That's true. Well, and so speaking of dualism and fiction, I in Paul Bloom's book Psych, which highly, highly recommend. It was not in my list, but I always recommend it because it's just a really, really good kind of intro to psych. If it could be used in Psych 101 courses, that would be awesome. It probably won't be because there's probably not enough money in the publishers for it. But in it, he recounts there's a short story, science fiction by Terry Bisson, that basically goes into and describes a bit of why, the notion of dualism and the mind-body, problem, such as it is so strange and why it's so enticing. And so the story is a short dialogue by a pair of hyper-intelligent aliens traveling through the universe to find sentient beings. And they find us. So one alien goes, meat. They're made of meat. And the other, meat? There's no doubt about it. We picked up several from different parts of the planet, took them aboard our recon vessels, and probed them all the way through. They're completely meat. That's impossible. What about the radio signals, the messages to the stars? They use the radio waves to talk, but the signals don't come from them. The signals come from machines. So who made the machines? That's who we want to contact. They made the machines. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Meat made the machines. That's ridiculous. How can meat make a machine? You're asking me to believe in sentient meat. Love it.
Excellent. I'm here for the full reading. I was just getting comfortable.
I mean, I always say we are emotional and rational meat sacks. So
pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I routinely describe in sessions with clients about remembering that we in fact do have meat suits, that it's not just all the work up here. But guess what? That goes into why dualism won't go away. It's exactly that very point. Because at a certain intuitive level, we just think that way. I mean, so there's a theory out there called the blind brain theory that I don't quite agree with, but man, it's enticing. I'm pretty certain I mentioned it before. But the whole thing goes into how the neural structures facilitate a situation where, because we don't have access to the inner workings, one of the questions that I asked, it gives the illusion that there's a separation going on. And so, it's kind of like the difference between going, well, we conceptually understand water as being a collection of, basically H2O atoms or molecules, sorry. And yet we have this experience of wetness. But what does that mean then when it refers to atoms? Do atoms have wetness? How does this work? Do molecules do it? Is there some kind of emergent property? Well, guess what? We're about to get into that. But we have this kind of intuitive grasp going, wait a minute, when I think, it's I doing it, right? Even the language itself, I have this I that is, attempting to change things and interact with things. And when I try to, you go back to, very, sorry, older thinkers, blanking on the person's name, around every time I look to see who is there, I can never find him. And the reality, and so it's oh, well, that must be because there's some kind of distance between, the brain body and who you are. And so this question has been around, forever. There's some conjecture as to the cave writings and drawings were seen as a way of instantiating conscious experience in a way that could explain it to other people. And going, well, I can't say it through words yet, but here is imagery. It's a theory. But as well, so just a small caveat. Some of this, I'm going to try not to go too much into the weeds with a lot of things, but it's impossible for dualism and so on with this Tara's having
sorry, I'm laughing. I've gotten
malfunctions.
tangled up in my gloves here. I'm trying to get unstuck. I'm very coordinated, y'all. This costume is super safe.
I don't know how you got
episode, everybody.
I'm just amazed that you got tangled and you're just wearing gloves, a t-shirt, and a mask.
Right. Just imagine if I wore something complicated. I would have died on my way to sit down at the computer.
Oh my gosh. That's fantastic.
Back on track.
Oh boy. I can't leave you alone. No.
You can't. No.
I need an adult.
So we have this intuitive feel about what it is to be conscious beings. And of course, this is where it's really impossible to fully avoid in talking about, dualism in its various forms without touching on such things as the nature of self and of course, free will. So in fact, this talk was a little bit inspired, it was a lot inspired, by Robert Sapolsky just released a new book. Highly recommend. He's got an entire YouTube group of speeches from his class on behaviorism that is just top notch. And his book is Determined. His initial one, or his one before that, is Behave. And this one is, in many ways, as he describes it, a kind of sequel of sorts. And unequivocally, he just declares free will, particularly the libertarian sense, is just, it's false. We don't have it. And he's raised a few eyebrows and ripples and very hurt feelings in the internets. And in fact, one, and this was the inspiration, was Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, who frankly I think is a delightful man. He's just a great thinker and very much loves humanity. But he was asked, on the death spiral that is Twitter, about, it's like, what he thought about Sapolsky's book. And he noted that he's like, I enjoy proving that free will exists by doing important things I don't want to do and making choices that are good for me, even if all the forces inside and outside of myself are consistently trying to move me in another direction. There are so many assumptions in this. And later on, noting, yes, I think human consciousness can defy the rest of nature. Okay, buddy. And when asked, well, wait a minute, where does your desire to do important things that you don't want to do to prove to yourself that their free will exists come from? And basically his response is, who cares? People make way too much out of where things come from. Now this is an avowed empiricist, naturalist, researcher who basically just unequivocally declared, who gives a shit? I get to declare that consciousness is a magic fairy that can do anything it wants. Which, frankly, I mean, I already have a pretty low opinion of my field. And having somebody like that declare some, things was just like, oh, well, I should have stuck with computers. But
you gotta wait till they give you the diploma before you say that out loud.
That is true. I will very much appreciate putting doctor at the end of my name. It'll be, I have no doubt my ego will be very happy about that. So I own this. Okay.
It's the only reason anyone gets to the end of writing a dissertation. It's okay.
No, that's true. Yeah. No, I swear, writing a dissertation is a testament to acknowledging that getting a doctorate has almost nothing to do with one's intelligence and everything to do with one's perseverance through bullshit. It is that's really what this is. I both laud doctorates more and look down upon them even more in equal measure now. So
I always say that, whenever I Like, when I graduate, everything that I've ever earned, I'm like, I am such a good hoop jumper. I am so good at this. Like,
yep, especially when the hoops keep
to
changing.
Prove it.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
You have to sometimes start jumping before the hoop is there yet in anticipation of what's coming.
Yeah.
Yep. It's really, I mean, yeah, anybody who like gets that and truly, I don't want to make any, I mean, it is a heck of a lot of work. So all power to everybody who has one. But it's, yeah, anybody who lauds it is, yeah, they're doing it kind of like, women who've given birth, laud how much they love their kids. Like they're trying to ignore the fact that pregnancy sucked. Giving birth was terrible. We're just trying
parasites.
to avoid.
They're parasites.
Yeah, we really, we want to forget how terrible it was.
I've read too, and yes, parasites.
Right. So yeah, Kaufman, just he was not having it. And I saw a lot of responses of this kind. It's if you notice there, and a little bit of what I read, there's a lot of smuggling in of assumptions, and which is often what ends up happening when we talk about dualism, free will, and so on. There's almost always a smuggling action going on where kind of hope that you don't get questioned too much about it. Of course, in his case, when he got questioned about it, he said, "Who cares?" So I mean, that's always a possible reply. So there is that, and so so when we come to dualism, these things are going to get touched on. I do highly recommend going and reading Cebulski's book. Although if you don't want to read the book, he has an absolutely delightful conversation with Michael Shermer on Shermer's podcast, Skeptic. It's about an hour and a half long, and they laugh, they joke. It's really fun to have two socially awkward geeks, doing jokes. It's really
Isn't that what we do here every Monday?
And that would be why I love the conversation. So, fair. But yes, definitely look that one up if you want kind of a bare bones, hey, this is what his point is. And really his notion, and trust me, I'll be getting back to dualism here in a second. His notion for his book is not necessarily to go after the philosophy of free will and all of that. His point is, and you see that in the subtitle of his book, it's how do we live knowing this is true? And part of the conversation he has with Shermer is going, it's really, really hard to live scientifically literate because our brains don't care. We just, in our emotional systems, don't care. Like, he described a situation where there was the shooter, I think it was in Charlottesville, who shot up a church, and he was being arraigned. And they were like, well, because it's a federal hate crime, he could be getting the death penalty, even though they don't have the death penalty in that state. And he remembers in recounting this that he's like, yeah, that's right, fuck that guy, just hook him up until he fries. And then he's like, and then a few minutes pass, and I reflected, I'm an expert witness in another death penalty case describing how we don't have free will and, this other thing. And he's like, this is hard. It's just, we want to deal with, at a level of intellectual integrity in one way, but we're poo-throwing monkeys. Like this is what we want to do, metaphorically, of course. Although
I was gonna say,
a couple of jobs where that didn't happen. Yeah, never mind. Work in mental health long enough, you'll have actual poo thrown at you.
I don't kink shame.
But hey, consent. The situation I'm remembering, there was not consensual. I want to take that and put it in here with dualism, because at a certain level, we really can't get away from it. Like, our language doesn't allow for an easy, consistent dialogue, or internally or otherwise, to recognize that there is no ephemeralness there. Like, this is it. And so at best, what we can do, and I get to this at the end, but as a kind of spoiler, at best we can do is incrementally implement certain things to help us combat. It's kind of like, basic cognitive heuristics, or biases. Biases are kind of like when heuristic meets morality. So, we can't get rid of them. The best we can do is try to be as aware as possible of their effect. And a lot of it is, and that's where I find myself getting to when it comes to issues around dualism, free will, the nature of the self, so on. Like, at the end of the day, I'm far less concerned about whether or not, in full agreement here, as far as, like, some of the ramifications, for instance, around the nature of the self and being able to just transcend any and all, naturalistic forces. Well, I mean, shoot, it creates the justice system that we have. I mean, the entirety of it is basically based on the idea that you have this immaterial self and therefore free will to be able to do anything you want regardless of circumstances. Like, that's it. So, and we all know the host of problems with the justice system. So when we talk about dualism here, kind of get a little into the weeds here, we talk about different forms of it. And one of them is, there are three basic ones. One is predicate, and this very much has to do with language. So basically the idea is there are two basic linguistic forms when we describe things. One is reducible and the other is irreducible. So by and large, psychological or mental predicates are essential to understand the world. So in the sense of money, stock exchange, devaluation of currency, infectious disease, basically concepts themselves. We can't boil that back down to its component parts. We lose something in the translation. Kind of like saying hurricane, and you're not going to go to somebody who's going, wow, I was in the midst of a hurricane, and go, that doesn't really actually make any sense. I think we need to break this down to wind speed and the amount of rainfall, and maybe the Coriolis effect. And they're like, no, that doesn't really capture this. Like, I went through a freaking hurricane.
You've obviously never had a conversation with my family.
Okay, each their own. So of course, part of the problem there is that it assumes that there is a singular way of talking about things, and that if you don't have a direct one-to-one relationship between things, in the sense of, like, H2O is water, like, it literally, like, that is, like, when you describe, when the molecule itself is water. So there is no, separation between the concept and the actual thing itself, other than, and here's where it gets into the problem of, well, if I write it down, obviously if I wrote it, the writing of it isn't the same. And that's part of the issue is, with predicate dualism, is that it assumes that there is this unitary, way of looking at things. And so we have to then get down to, well, some things can be broken down and not others. One of the great ways of kind of threading the needle here is the poetic naturalism, described by now I'm totally Yeah, the big picture guy book. But he basically, acknowledges that both exist at the
Sean
same time, kind
Carroll.
of thing. Thank you, Sean Carroll's book. Excellent book. If you want a breakdown of like all of physics without the math, that book does it. It is amazing. You feel a whole lot smarter at the end of it.
How is that even
And
possible?
so, it's stunning how he does it. He's just a phenomenal teacher through it.
Adding
And
to the list.
he basically just acknowledges that, well, we can do both. Like, it depends on categories. Like, if one starts with a description of going, okay, I'm going to talk about the component parts of, and then we're going to have this conversation. If I'm going to talk about one's experiential descriptions, I'm going to use, different verbiage. That's okay. Like, there's no problem here. So with that, most people don't really have a huge problem with this form of dualism. Frankly, I don't either. I mean, it's just basically acknowledgement that we have different ways of talking about things. However, most of the time when we talk about dualism, we refer to it in the substance way. Descartes, Plato, Aristotle to a degree. And from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which if you want to really have a free encyclopedia of all things philosophical, and possibly find some really good reading to help you go to sleep at night, that website is just worth everything to take some time and peruse. And so with substance dualism, we're really talking about, whereas predicate said, well, there are linguistic categories here of reducible and irreducible. The substance says, there are two distinct substances to the world. They're the material and the immaterial. And obviously other versions of other ways of phrasing that. But, basically you have these two things. And for the most part, it's so for instance, from that site, one might try to think of these subjects as just, bundles of the immaterial states. Like, here we are. This is who we are. It's just bundles of these things. However, this is Hume, not Brit Hume, but philosopher Hume view. But if one thinks that the owner of these states is something quite over and above them and is immaterial, therefore you're a substance dualist. So basically you're saying, well, there's just something that is different about this, and it can't be broken down into physicality or physics or any of this. There's just something inherently different. This is why, the belief in ghosts, defined certainly, I got to reference ghosts because it's Halloween. This is why, pretty much all the basic or traditional, religions, Christianity, certain forms of Judaism, Islam, are inherently substance dualists. You kind of have to be. There's literally no way of being, consistent intellectually. And yes, it is quite possible to attempt to being intellectually consistent. You just have to, assume certain, assumptions there. But as a believer, and that you're going to eventually say, well, the mind has to be the soul, God himself, themselves, whatever, and so on, are all immaterial. There is just something over and above everything else. It have to be. It requires it. In fact, the very notion of sin requires this kind of substance dualism idea. It has to, because the entire notion of sin is the idea that there is this force that kind of supersedes upon our physicality in such a way that it conforms and narrows our capacity for choices. Like that's the thing. Like it is a declaration that there are these things that are encouraging and requiring certain outcomes, and we can't see it, we can't have access to it other than, of course, through our own faith. And faith as a different epistemic system, so a different way of knowing, that's how you have access to it. These things all fall into place. I mean, this is why it's almost impossible to have really a conversation around dualism without getting into the nature of self and free will, because they all work. Libertarian free will requires, just like sin does, it requires a substance that is other than material. It requires it because the whole point of it is to be able to declare that, well, all things being exactly the same in the past, I could have done different. Really? So you were able, there's something about you that is able to transcend the cause-effect relationships of the entire natural universe. Right. Okay. I mean, it's okay, but in order to do that, you have to have something that itself transcends it. So
okay, so in this example, then with the some of the major religions, that extra immaterial piece is the soul or the spirit, right? That's the immaterial portion, rather than it seems like sometimes in more of the academic writings that you've been referencing, they'll say the mind, but that's essentially filling the same role as the spirit or the soul in religious contexts, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
It's just variations on the same, idea that there is two fundamentally different substances kind of, interacting somehow. Of course, here's one of the criticisms of it, all the way back to, Plato and Kant and so on, which is kind of going, so how does that work exactly? I mean, even Descartes himself, in his written dialogue with, I always forget, who was the Queen, maybe the Queen of England, maybe, no, it wasn't the Queen of England. It was, the European Queen. But she was in a written dialogue with him and posed that to him as well.
Princess Elizabeth.
Thank you. Yes.
That was Dr. Google that answered that question.
Google is the all-knowing God.
It is. And so she posed the question even then, like, so how does that actually interact? Like, if this thing is so utterly different, then, and we know how the naturalistic thing works because of mechanism and so on, how does that, affect this? Let's just say that his answer was less than convincing to her.
So is it basically, there's this part we know about, and then there's this other part that's the rest of it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, and that's why, again, we come back to, well, if you're Kaufman, who cares? I'm totally just going to be poking at that guy, and I love him. Actually, he actually has a book out on, I think it's Transcend, which goes into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's a lovely, lovely book. But it was just that exchange of it just tickled me. So it's like, oh, who cares? Or it's faith. Like, we leave things off into this kind of nebulousness because we need a way of accessing this other substance in order to attempt making sense of any of this. And of course, that's the problem, because now it's like, well, how do we know that faith works? Well, it's the substance of things unseen, right? I mean, it's literally in the definition. It ends up being just basically solipsism. Like, why does it exist? Well, because this exists. Well, how do we know that exists? Well, because of this. It's ultimately what we have to have. So you would think that this would be pretty easy to dismiss. It's just on the face of it largely absurd. Well, so because we really coming back to that like intuitive desire to understand how we are, and the fact that we don't have access to our unconscious experiences. In fact, even calling them experiences was a misnomer on my part. Is that we want to have an answer to it. So what do we do? Well, now we come to the third, quality here, which is property dualism. Essentially, you're right. Everything is physical, but there are some things that kind of have the magic qualities of that immaterial substance. And this is where we get into, like, one of the questions, in the chat around quantum theory or emergent properties. In fact, there was a conversation that was at Tyson had around free will, and he was asked about it, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he basically just gave the standard, like, well, I think it's an emergent property, which admittedly, I always love listening to Tyson delve into philosophy because he has no idea what he's doing. And he avowedly doesn't agree with the utility of it, but he uses it whenever he wants to, get away with something. So basically it's like, oh, hey, this is an emergent property. It just comes out of because we have enough neurons that come together and boom, you've got something magical. Well, here's the problem with that. And this is actually from Shermer and Sapolsky's conversation, also Sapolsky's book, is that, again, always pay attention to the smuggling in of assumptions. The emergent idea here is that somehow, consciousness has this quality of dualistic capacity to be able to, step back and change the, substance of the universe, is to essentially assume that you have these groups of simple, basically dumb things. Like, really, I mean, it's like individual birds together are pretty simple and dumb, but all of a sudden you put a bunch of them together and they have these patterns flocking in the sky. Like, oh my gosh, they must have, fought through that so much. Not really. It was pretty much an instinctual thing. We have, these neurons, which are by themselves fairly simple and dumb. Like, and not using the term in a pejorative way, it's literally like they can't do anything individually. Like, an individual neuron doesn't solve anything. And no, there is no such thing as your grandma mirror neurons and so on. That was a thing. Anyway, but, it's like individually they don't. So as Sapolsky notes, just because you now have an emergent property doesn't mean that that property takes on a life of its own and can retroactively declare that the simple dumb things are suddenly really special and intelligent. No, they're still simple. They're still dumb. They didn't suddenly change just because together they created something else. That's it. So any more than, for instance, H2O and wetness. You get enough H2O molecules together, you're going to have this experience of wetness. But it's not like wetness can go backwards and go, H2O, I think you can have H3O. I'm pretty certain I can change this. No, like it doesn't, it can't work that way. And so we now have a problem of going, okay, well, wait a minute. So if, the emergentist idea of around property dualism, doesn't work, then why do we keep perpetuating such ideas as, and here's my, big criticism of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because cognitive behavioral therapy is itself predicated on the notion that not only, one, do thoughts come first, which neurologically is not true, but two, that thoughts have the capacity in their own separate substance to be able to go back and change your brain. No, it's just not. It's all mechanism all the way down. Now, does that mean that cognitive, behavioral therapy is useless? Clearly not. I use many of the tools out of it. But it's a issue of where do we get stuck in, and this is where I'm going to try to bring this into the practical instead of, all the way up here, is that where do we get stuck quite often in judging ourselves and judging others? And how often do we find ourselves looking at what we've done in the past and go, I should have known better. I should have done better. It's the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. It's basically, and how's that go? Whenever you should, you're basically just shitting all over yourself. I mean, it's just, this is, how do we, judge other people in going, well, nope, I don't need to know the context or of what you did. You should have known better, and this is how it's going to be. No. Again, it's not that we can't judge actions, but it depends again on what are we going to do to help mitigate or reduce the possibility of those negative things happening again, and getting caught up in this notion of our conscious lives being able to transcend, natural law isn't going to be helpful, because at that point, really, what do? We just have to shake our finger at them and tell them to do your work and you'll be fine. And it's like, just think harder about this. Well, no, everybody, including ourselves, we are all reacting within all of these different influences, of which one of those influences is, yes, our conscious experience, but it doesn't have the power to suddenly change everything. It is one piece of how we move forward. And we get caught up in that assumption around the power of it in our judgments, in our ways of looking at morality and so on, that trap us into spinning over and over and over again. It's the there's one phrase that they often encounter these days is catching feelings. It's like, I'm worried about catching feelings. Well, they're not floating around. They're not, you're not in a snowstorm when feelings are just like, woo, whirling all over the place. And if you wear the wrong coat, it's going to stick to you. Like, that's how it works. If you engage in particular behavior, guess what? Feelings are going to happen. You don't have any choice in the matter. I mean, literally, it's one of the first things I work with so many people on is going, feelings are not anything you have any control over at all. I mean, just ponder for a moment. Do you really sit there after you're having a feeling experience, go, I'm glad I made that choice to have that feeling, because I had these 6 options and I just sat back and looked at all these different options and boom, that's the one I chose to have.
I chose ugly cry. I mean, why would you not?
Why would you not? I mean, really, like it's there. Same thing with our own thoughts. This is the power of, a form of non-dual meditation, is a recognition that where are our thoughts coming from? Nothing we have any access to. I mean, they're just there. It's not like, again, we're sitting there going, I think I'm going to have that thought next. No, in fact, even that very practice, like, wait a minute, but who's having the thought of having the thought that I'm going to, oh, now I need to have a drink. Like, I mean, it just, this is when we sit back enough and go, okay, wait a minute. If substance dualism is false, and including the magic powers of that do not suddenly appear upon physicality, then I should give myself a little bit of a break when it comes to some of the thoughts that sometimes pop up. I've encountered quite often, where it's like, I had this fill in the blank awful thought. Does that mean I'm a sociopath? Does that mean that I'm going to do this? I'm like, do you want to? No. Okay. Did you choose to have, did you sit there and go, you know what? I think I'm going to have this next thought of, slaughtering animals. This is what it is. No, of course not. It just happened to be there. Maybe you watch too much horror films. I don't know. It's, in some ways, intrusive thoughts, thank you for bringing that up, is everything. Everything is an intrusive thought in a broad sense of the term. I understand there's a difference in clinically when it comes to intrusive thoughts. But one of the ways of mitigating the effect of clinically significant kind of intrusive thoughts is to also recognize that every thought we have is intrusive in the sense of we're not actively choosing it. We're not there in charge. They're just popping up. So how can we kind of, engage? And again, this is where things get really tricky with our language. Here I am starting to now you can start engaging with this. Wait, who's the you that is, doing this? God damn it. What am I supposed to do here? So, for instance, good question on, can thoughts be directed? Exactly where we start going. They can be, but not in any kind of supervenient or overarching or spiritual way. We're not asking the Holy Spirit to enter into our lives and make our thoughts better. What we're doing is instead going, okay, well, if everything that is appearing is itself derived from more variables than we can consciously consider at any given moment, then what can we do? Well, as it is, we do as much as we can on surrounding ourselves with what wants to feed into who we want to be. What books do we read? It's why I love reading. It's why I love reading so much. It's why, it's like, okay, who do we, interact with? How often do I question the judgments that I am making? How often am I smuggling into my own judgments of myself a notion that I suddenly have the power to transcend natural order? And again, that's why we come back to notions of what Sapolsky was talking about with free will. It's just going, we're not going to break out of this. We are in this particular historical milieu that, while on one hand, we can almost universally these days, other than certain pockets of humanity, declare that witchcraft is not real, that there are not, in fact, witches with pointy hats riding brooms controlling the weather through their, I don't know, feminine wiles.
It's evil vagina magic, really, David.
You know how those feminine wiles are.
My head was going there, and I'm like, no, wait, Helen. There it is, vagina magic.
Helen has witch cred.
I do. I was a witch.
She might fly into your chimney overnight, which I've recently been learning about in New England. There are many things you can do in the construction of your home to stop witches from being able to get in. You got to have a turn in your chimney so that they can't come straight down. And some of the windows have to be turned sideways so that if they try to fly through, they'll get knocked off of their broom. I'm not making this up, y'all. This is real art.
Because, not only do witches have deep magical powers, but they're also very easily tricked by physics.
They're very uncoordinated.
They are
very uncoordinated.
So I did want to say something about, I remember one of my therapists, when I was we were going through, I was doing trauma therapy, and I was talking about the thoughts I would have, and it was basically acknowledging the thought, but not accepting the thought. You know, and how to have that separate sort of relationship with it, that just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. And she wouldn't say you change the thought, because that's harder. It's just a matter of, do you accept the thought? You know, if someone calls you like a bad name, is it true? You know, if you think of yourself as this worthless person, is that true? And you have to kind of do a little bit of street epistemology on yourself, you know, and walk yourself through why you're having those thoughts. And
CBT.
Yeah. And that's what the CBT helped, which was great. But
behavioral therapy.
Therapy. Yes. Yes.
So I'm just talking, like, you know, that's like, now I have a different relationship with the way that I think. Before, where I thought that every single thought I had was saying something about myself, that, you know, whether it was good or bad, you know.
So then there's a difference between thinking about your thoughts and thinking in order to be in control of whether the thoughts happen. That the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's, so in one sense, you don't even use the phrase, like, you can't change a thought. It's already there. So, you know, when it refers to basically, you know, behaviorism, and, you know, it's basically looking at going, don't really bother trying to change things that have already happened. Instead, we add on to them. You know, again, that changing thoughts thing is essentially smuggling in the idea that by purely thinking, I can go back and change this thing before. No, you can't. Like, and for good, I mean, really, can we? This is why, I mean, I had a little bit of fun with that last question about, wouldn't it be nice if magic existed? Which, small caveat, I have some questions about the number of people who said, only if I could pick who got the power. That's a little authoritarian. I mean, I don't disagree in some ways, but I'm well aware that is,
they want to play God.
A liberal ethic. Right?
Could we share the results of that?
Responsibility. Right. So we can share the poll on that.
Okay. Hold on, let me grab it. I can't do it. Helen will have to share the poll results, because for some reason the Zoom gremlins do not want to allow me to do the Zoom poll this evening.
Okay, it's up.
Awesome. So yeah, do you think the mind is separate from the body? There were a few people who said yes. Now, here's the thing. Speaking of smuggling in ideas, obviously with these questions, it's impossible to put out like, well, you know, depending on the definition of, and like, this is, you know, a controlled, forced choice kind of thing. So there are a few people who said yes to those. I would love to hear how you define both. Vast majority, 61% said no. And definitely the vast majority, so 18%, of course not, full material. So that equaled 79%. So not surprising. If I had put that poll to, you know, Fox News viewers, I'd probably get a very different response. Do you have access to unconscious processes? Yeah, this is most fun. You know, yes. Again, for those who said yes, always would be interesting to determine, you know, what you think of as unconscious. So there might be some just definitional things going on there.
I think some people can't see the poll. It might still be running in the background. Helen, are you able to?
Oh, there we go. Show results. I got it.
Okay.
Somehow I had the power.
See, this is weird. I do not have the power
anymore. It's all me and Dave.
Y'all have the extra powers. Okay. Can everyone see the poll now? Chime in the chat and let us know.
Everybody see now?
Yay. Okay, sorry. Carry on explaining the poll results, please.
Yep. So number 2, do you have access to unconscious processes? Again, some of this is going to be definitional. Be really curious. Maybe we can bring that up in the hangout afterwards. You know, what exactly are you referring to in conscious? Do you think you have access to it? I love that people, a few said yes, totally exists in the land of imagination. Every time I think of land of imagination, I think of South Park.
That's yeah.
I mean, it's
the little
imagination,
song
right?
just plays in my head.
It is, yeah. Third, you know, is conscious experience able to change the brain body? Of course. What else is thinking for? Always fun. 3 cheers for CBT. Wait, smell something off about this. I think somebody figured out who was presenting today. Maybe, but it's only one of many variables or outcomes. Why isn't this an essay? I love that. And then, of course, it would be awesome if magic existed. You know, yes, no, only if I could pick who got the power. Some people are thinking that I'm judging the people who said yes to that. I'm not. It really has more to do with the amusement of that we all think we can make good choices when we have ultimate power like that. Which anybody read? They made a movie out of it, The Power. Amazon did a version of it.
No,
which,
what is this?
Yeah, it was a big deal. Like, so the whole premise is about you know, women suddenly develop this extra piece of their brains that allows them to channel electricity, and so eventually they, you know, take over the whole world. And what's interesting about it, and it's not often what's focused on, which I find very interesting, is that it describes at the beginning and at the end, like the world that gets created when you have power accrued to a very select group of people. You don't suddenly turn into benevolent dictators. Like, they are keeping people in cages, like, and parading them out. I mean, it's a dystopian book. So it's always interesting to see how people respond to, you know, what's the collective idea of what that book was about. It's like, this was really dark. Not good.
So there are contentious views on what that book is about.
Most of it's at least from what I read, and it may just be what I had access to. So I will totally chalk this up to you know, whatever narrow number of people that I saw. But that it was this like feminine empowerment book, and that's right. Men have been treating us badly all this time. Wait till we get this kind of power, and you're like, yeah, wait. Because it doesn't all of a sudden make you good when the tables are turned. Like this is really a problem, and that point seemed to be completely missed. Yeah,
oh, interesting.
It reminds me of Dan Brown's book. You know, when everybody focused so much on, oh my God, Jesus had a kid, and of course Dan Brown utterly milked that. But if you read the book, like there's a 10-page section where it goes into and describes the point of the entire novel, which is this loss of the feminine in religion that humanity needs to reconnect with. And in fact, the symbologist at the end, you know, played by Tom Hanks in the book, figures out where the secret, where the whole thing leads to, and bows down in front of this ultimate symbol of the feminine, recognizing the duality of humanity and that we need to be more in touch with the totality of human nature and so on. Like, that's the whole thing. And then people are like, yeah, but Jesus totally had sex. That's the thing. That's the important thing. Like, you know, the fact that you're focusing on this means even more so that you are missing truly the point of pogroms against women and witch burnings and so on. Like, yeah, this is ridiculous.
Like, it's a very different experience reading a Dan Brown book and watching the movie adaptation as well.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Yeah. What was it? That was the movie The Firm with Tom Cruise. in the book, they changed the ending because they didn't want, because in the book, he never tells his wife that he had an affair.
Oh, really?
But in the
I
movie,
haven't read
they
the
make
book.
that
I've
a
only seen
plot
the
point.
movie.
Yeah, in the movie, they make that a plot point. And part of the discussion was, well, you know, Tom Cruise is a stand-up guy, and we don't want him acting in that kind of character. Well, clearly, you hadn't known Tom Cruise yet. But, you know, this is,
well,
but it's just really...
They did the same thing to Cary Grant in the 60s with the Hitchcock film, you know, because they didn't want Cary Grant to be a murderer, you know, even though he wanted to play a dramatic role. They were like, no, you can't be a murderer, and because you have a public image too. And I'm like, it's not real, guys.
Yeah. What was it, Daniel Radcliffe, when he post Harry Potter, he went on and did some he's done a lot of theater acting. Yeah, and there was one where he was, Equus, totally in the nude, and people are like, you are a symbol of whatever, and he's like, I'm an actor.
This is what I do for work.
Oh my gosh, love it. But there it is, you know. But in fact, yes, I can tie this into the presentation. Is what are we doing there? We're basically taking a transcendent thing and saying, well, it's not about what the person did, it's about who they are. And I can take that and run with it anywhere else. And so you aren't just an actor, you are this character, this immaterial thing that now suddenly we have to judge you based on that forever. You know, so one of the things around, you know, not only do we have CBT, but we have a lot of things in society these days that are almost like a kind of a reascendancy of mind over matter. You know, the preoccupation with group identities. I mean, basically, what is it? Well, it's predicated right on the notion that these ideas, that these identities that we all kind of, you know, we've collectively described have a power in of themselves. And once you're in it, like, you know, that's it. We can determine who you, I don't even have to look at what you did. I can just simply consider you based on, you know, this, you know, quasi spiritual idea of what what I group you would belong to. I mean, that's really, ultimately, it's just this notion that there's just this other substance that we can judge people accordingly. We don't have to look at who you are. We don't have to look at what you did. All of that stuff is, you know, not important. Instead, what is? Well, you know, this thing that we've now, you know, given a magical property to. So this is where it gets into, and then there have been a few questions. You know, so it's coming into like, what are activities that we can do daily to kind of undermine this? And this is part of, I totally went on a tangent around witches, but, you know, basically science progress and technological progress has largely been about limiting and removing the power of dualism in our lives. It's basically about removing the spiritual in that dualistic fashion from life. We no longer look at weather and go, let's look around for that, you know, pointy nose witch. Like, you know, we had a problem. No, we consult the meteorologists who have degrees in how this works. You know, if we have problems with our, you know, cattle, again, we're not looking at witches. We're consulting gene therapies and breeding and, you know, issues of feed and so on and so forth. We just don't do it. In fact, for most people, it's bizarre to even imagine that anybody truly thought that that was a legitimate way of acting. You encounter it every so often when people are like, "Ah, come on, nobody actually thought that, right?" No, I think they literally killed tens of thousands of women, you know, based on this notion that the mental powers that women possessed could change weather and so on. Like, this is legit. And we are so used to the progress that we have made in our understanding and application of that understanding scientifically. We don't even, we're no longer even capable of stepping into that mental framework. Good. Like, this is not a call for, we need to get back to the good old days.
The good old days when witches caused everything bad.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
life was simpler then.
Right. And in fact, anymore, who knows what'll happen 100 years, 200 years from now? You know, somebody may encounter this presentation. There's hubris. But anyway, you know, somebody may encounter, you know, this presentation and go, really? People had actual ideas concerning belief that their mental capacity could control things in that way? Wow. Really? I mean, it just, we may get to the point with some of our scientific progress where the idea of judging ourselves about, you know, through the possession of a magic power that we don't have just won't even occur to people anymore. We'll have gotten so used to whatever the technology goes. I mean, there's some crazy stuff, you know, with, you know, thought programming and being able to move, you know, robotic limbs and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just crazy. Now, granted, I'm being a little idealistic, which is usually something I'm never accused of. So, you know, in the comment, it seems unlikely. Yeah, a little bit. But then again, I'm sure if we could, you know, open up a quantum tunnel back to, you know, the 14th century, that we could ask any number of people and go, you know, eventually people are going to recognize that witches can't control the weather. And they're like, whatever. That's not going to happen. Who knows? I mean, it's, you know, there are things we think now and take for granted that were absolutely anathema 50, 60 years ago, even 100 years ago. So who knows? But, you know, it's, but a few questions when just going about, you know, daily business. Have I given agency where none was deserved? You know, did I, in my judgment of myself, you know, it can be a little trickier to apply this to other people. So start with you. You know, it's just like, did I, when I told myself, wow, I really got down on the fact that I should have been able to do otherwise. Oh, am I really saying that all things being equal, I really should have just been able to transcend this and be able to do anything I want? Well, that's silly. Okay. Well, then what should I be focused on? Well, doing whatever we can to variably shift what's going to happen next. Has my judgment been based on the person being able to do otherwise, all things being equal? Have I considered a physical context for my feelings? This is another one of those, you know, fairly modern things around, well, I feel this, therefore it must be right. Because there's also a conflation there going on between feelings and the stories that come along for the ride. But, you know, it's like, but that's just it. We're effectively saying, well, I have this experience internally, and now I get to define the entirety of this experience for myself and other people. Maybe I just have indigestion. You know, maybe I'm sick. Maybe I'm hangry. In fact, there is the fact that we even have words like that, I mean, hangry, is a recognition that our thoughts and feelings and even our behaviors are tied in some way to digestion and caloric intake and so on. Like, we are steadily having these notions that are kind of undermining the magic of property dualism, the magic of having a consciousness that transcends, you know, all matter. You know, the fact that we even have a legal system has been changing in the sense of, well, we need to consider mitigating factors, or, you know, was there, you know, qualifying factors to, you know, encourage this? The very fact that when, you know, a mass shooter, you know, happens, so quickly people go to, well, it must be mental illness, without cluing in, which is always amazing to me, that most of the people that immediately go to mental illness are the people who believe in abjectly possible free will. That kind of libertarian free will really doesn't work well with mental illness because you should be able to transcend all of that, right? So always, but again, we're not looking at intellectual consistency here. But the very fact that we even have those ideas, though, is slowly undermining and recognizing, you know what? We really need to be taking a broader look at what we're doing. Be a little slower to judge and take a look at what can we do to help mitigate and reduce the chances of the thing we don't want to happen again. Because ultimately that's what, this, is really what we want. We want better outcomes, right? We want things to keep getting better. So how do we do that? Well, we either rest on the power of the mind, not going to be really helpful, or we actively seek to understand our physical universe as best as possible to see what we can tweak, what we can involve ourselves with, and how, like Helen rightly noted earlier, that sometimes we need to change our relationship that we have with our own thoughts to be able to sit there and allow them to go through us to go, huh, you showed up again. That's nice. Next. And it's like, I don't have to define myself by you anymore. That's where the freedom is. It's not going to be found in thinking we can transcend all of this. It will be found in the only transcendence we can, which is making the world we have better incrementally.
So. I like that. That's a good kind of summing up there.
That's my TED Talk.
Excellent TED Talk, part 15. I love it. No, that's great. And that is probably a good point to jump off to the Q&A, unless you have any closing thoughts you want to leave us with first. All right.
Nope.
All right, well then let's do it.
I will get to that question.
Yes, I want to go to your questions.
It just popped up.
Yes, you start with that one. Which question is that?
Let's just go ahead and start with it because that's going to get the hardest so much. So yes, the question is, if you can't control your thoughts, how do you control your relationship to them? So let's just get rid of this notion of control. Because again, always asking this, like, what am I smuggling in here? I mean, control here is smuggling in the notion that there are things that can, in a one-to-one kind of relationship, be able to say, oh, I can do this on you. I can shift this. Nope. It's not about control. It's about increasing flexibility through behavioral change. So, it's getting into a new habit by looking at, okay, which was most helpful. Yeah. Interfamily systems. Yeah. IFS is a great therapeutic theory. And part of the relationship change is, frankly, attending talks like this, reading some of the books that are in the list, listening to discussions that undermine some of these assumed things that we are smuggling in, often without our full awareness. In fact, as it even noted there in the comment, it's awareness. It's the very fact that you have attended this means that there are ripple effects of potential behaviors that without having attended wouldn't have. I mean, it's where, if we're going to have any kind of power at all over what we're going to do, then being as actively engaged as possible with what it is that we are having in our lives, the influences that are there. that's where it's going to be found. And this is really a little bit of why people like Daniel Dennett now looks and doesn't really like the whole conversation about free will, because he's like, no, we need the idea of it in order to facilitate morality and so on, even though he fully recognizes there is no such thing. And I'm not really a big pusher on let's, promote a fake thing in order to hopefully have it get better outcomes. But yeah, Dennis is a really smart guy, so he knows something I don't. But it's instead we can just kind of go, you know what? Maybe just for 5 seconds, I can think of myself as not having total control over what I'm about to do or what thought's going to come up next. And if for those couple of seconds I can let go of the notion of having control, I can let go of the notion that I have some kind of magical power that I can transcend all these things, maybe I have a little less anxiety. The anxiety translates into physiological response, which then does what? Shifts the potential external possibilities going forward in life. It all just kind of, this is where studying behaviorism can be really, fascinating, because, when you have the ABC model of antecedent, behavior, consequence, one of the fundamental ways of studying behaviorism is to acknowledge that any of those three could be the other one, depending on the perspective you're bringing. Like every behavior that we're isolating is itself a precursor to something else, which itself could be a consequence of something else. There is no one to one to one to one. This is not a straight line. Somebody had mentioned earlier about, and probably in reference to Doctor Who as well, the wibbly wobbliness of all of this. We don't have access in figuring out like all of the influences that are going to be over our lives. Okay, then insofar as we can gain an awareness of, we then act on it. It's okay. I don't need the notion of being able to transcend these things to keep doing what I'm doing, which is expanding awareness. By removing that kind of magical idea, what I do is remove the pressure of getting it right, of being, like, oh, now I have to judge myself fully on, like, no, okay, that didn't work out. That was not the ideal that I would like. What can I do so that the next time I'm a little bit better? Okay, you can do this. All right. Instead of, wallowing in the shame.
Fair enough. And on that note, we do have kind of a related question then, or one that this sort of circled into, which is, how much of psychology is science and how much is philosophy, given that the brain is difficult to study and we don't necessarily know what's going on all the time?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, you don't get into a whole lot of philosophy in psych programs. As Daniel Siegel in his book, I think it was, Mindsight. I think it was that one, where he describes how he was actually studying. Initially, he started off studying neurology, and he didn't okay. So he went into psych, and he went around. He's like, okay, so we're going to study the mind. And he went around and asked people, what is the mind? And got a bunch of silence. And he's like, wait, are you telling me we have created an entire field of study about something of which nobody has a definition of that makes any universal sense to everybody else involved here? Right. Just don't ask and keep going. So yeah, I mean,
sounds like the foundation of any great academic discipline.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so he actually has a pretty interesting idea of what mind is as a trifecta system of basically symbolism, relationships, and intent. Couple noun words on that, but very interesting to work through if you get a chance to read some of his stuff. But yeah, so is it? Yeah, this is one of my biggest pet peeves around psychology is that there's so much philosophy happening without anybody acknowledging that it is. And when you read so much of so-called research papers, there is a lot of smuggling in of assumptions that are often not called out. In fact, before my dissertation changed, what the topic I was going to be focusing on was the non-religious experience in therapy, because there's a tacit assumption in psychotherapy that religion and spirituality is a net good. It's an inherent good. Like it's just this we should bring this up, right? Which is why you have upwards of like 38% polled that have encountered a religious intervention, even though they explicitly stated that they don't want it, because therapists, by and large, when asked, think this should happen. I should be telling them about the Bible and my faith and asking them where that is. You read most of the papers that are written about spirituality. It's just an assumption that this must be a good thing. And so that was what I was going to be looking into. It's not going to have to wait until after I get done. But there it is. I mean, it's one of those things where this is ridiculously pervasive. And again, sorry, got off track. But it's the philosophy behind it. It's that assumption around this is how this is, and nobody's questioning it.
Always good to question assumptions, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, then let's have one more question while we're here. Helen, do you have a question for us? I know we have more, but we'll try to get to some more in the Hangout, but we got time for one.
Let's see. Let's see. Is reinterpreting a thought a choice?
Again, what are we smuggling in? It's what, in fact, one way of looking at this then is to ask a follow-up. Did what I do next change what came before? No. Reinterpretation doesn't suddenly make the previous thought go away. It's still there. It still existed, even if it was for a brief moment. Like, it's okay. And so that's another question to ask. It's like any intervention I do, does it make what's come before disappear? Well, if I think it does, well, I'm probably delving into, a very magical dualism. If instead I just acknowledge this happened, and now what am I going to do about it? That allows us to stay within the here and now and go, okay, well, what else is going on that is influencing me? I haven't slept in a while. And maybe I drank way too much freaking caffeine. I mean, these things literally, that's why we use substances like this, is to change our conscious experience. Well, if consciousness was some kind of magical property, then none of that should really work very well. Or if you think it does, then okay, but how? We're back to the same substance problem again. How does the physicality change this magic? To the point of real danger. I mean, in the sense of, in fact, was just reading a story the other day about a young woman who, I think she was 21, 22, something like that, died from after, drinking a 30-ounce cup of the, was it charged lemonade from Panera. And she had known from very young that she had a heart issue where caffeine would cause arrhythmia. And as a consequence, according to her parents, they were very, very just dedicated. You have very little, if none caffeine. I mean, she stayed away from all of it. And some reason got into her head that she's going to drink this. I mean, it's all over the place. It's caffeinated. And they drank 30 ounces of it. And boom, had a heart attack and died. And now the parents are suing due to an opportunistic lawyer to try to sue Panera for not having, said exactly how much caffeine was in, this drink. And, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel for you. The loss it's never going to be solved. Like this is tragic. And it's also a really brutal reminder that what we put into our bodies has an effect on our conscious experience to the point of ceasing it. And if we acknowledge that, well, then wait a minute. If that's true, then that is also then a way of affecting what we do and how we then live our lives and how we encourage certain outcomes to happen as opposed to other ones.
You're noticing that comment in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, this is another one where there's a lot of smuggling going on again, because the very concept of beginning requires a perspective. So we're asking the question with a kind of a tacit assumption that we're the one asking it. So it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. Well, it makes sound waves, but does it make a sound in the sense of what we experience as sound? Clearly not, because there wasn't anybody around to interpret it. It just kind of existed. Same thing with beginnings. A beginning, it's same thing as the ABC model of behaviorism. Well, what do you mean? Well, this is the behavior. Well, what came before it? Well, yeah, but this is a kind of an arbitrary thing that we're using to try to help, understand relationships better. Beginning isn't a thing. In fact, there's another, I read a lot. There's another article, I think it was Annika Harris recently wrote in Nautilus, where she was exploring this notion around how an increasing number of physicists are looking at time itself being not really a thing. That itself is also a emergent property. So interesting.
And this is how we knew quantum physics was going to come into this, and that was one of the questions.
Well, there was a question around quantum theory
that
earlier.
For the hangout.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's go into our super quantum physics mode in the hangout, because Helen is very popular and has another podcast appointment this evening, so we do need to end on time tonight. So
yeah, so I'm going to start the close and then I'm going to skedaddle. So, but David, thank you so much for doing this talk. My philosophy brain again started itching, and then I realized that I had more to think about, and I'll probably fall down some rabbit holes later, knowing how these things go. Yeah.
And check out more information on David's websites, where you can find his musings as well as the books that he has recommended for us this evening, which I am going to drop in the chat. And Helen, what are we doing next week?
So next week we have Chris Shelton And he'll be doing a talk on why smart people fall for religion. So join us for a talk with writer and consultant Chris Shelton about his experience growing up in and escaping the cult of Scientology, helping others escape their cult, getting a master's in psychology of coercive control, and educating the public about cultic influence and how our emotional needs drives us in opposite directions to what our critical thinking tells us we should be doing. This goes back into the dualism discussion. We'll discuss the myth of stupid cult member and what role intelligence and skepticism play in avoiding manipulative and coercive predators. I said it. I did it. Yeah.
Well done. Well done.
So it's gonna be awesome. I'm so glad he's coming. I'm so excited.
Yes.
Go me.
Too. I'm really looking forward to that one. So we will continue the conversation next week. And while I mentioned to y'all where else you can find awesome content, Helen is going to go make some awesome content. So
bye,
there will
all.
be more on the interwebs. Bye, Helen.
Have a great Halloween tomorrow. Get some spooks and some candy, and frighten a small child. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Ellen. And for those of you that are gonna stay in for the holiday, you can watch some previous episodes of RfRx, as many as 159 previous episodes on our YouTube channel, or you can catch the audio version wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have questions, comments, ideas for future shows, anything like that, don't forget to email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org and check out the blog and the podcast for more content. Now, in addition to that, I know y'all know how to operate the social medias probably better than I do. And if you would like to engage with us on said social medias, that really helps us because it helps other people find us and get the word out about the awesome things and services that they can get at Recovering from Religion, and reminds them that they can come to these really fun talks every week. So if you are on any of the socials, come find us and give us a like or a follow or a subscribe or a comment or a share or whatever happens on that platform. We are on Facebook. We have both a Facebook main page and a Facebook support group page. We are on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. I think that covers most of it. And of course, we have our webpage, recoveringfromreligion.org. So check us out on all of those. And I would ordinarily at this moment launch our feedback poll, but since the Zoom gremlins have decided that I'm not launching polls this evening, let's see. Fingers crossed on that one. Can y'all see this exit poll? Yay, it's working in our hour of need. Okay, so I will quickly read these questions for you. It's the same ones as always. Some of them are comments, not questions. So the first one is, this program was relevant to me. Answer choices are on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all and 5 being very much relevant. Answers 2 through 4 are in the middle. Second statement, the speaker was clear and understandable. Same answer scale, 1 through 5. 1 being not at all understandable, as we say, banana phone. Don't understand anything, including what that analogy is. That would be a 1. And 5 is very understandable. It was like he was in the room with me, very clear. Number 3, I will definitely attend future programs like this. Same answer scale, 1 through 5. 1 being definitely not. I don't even know why I'm still here. I waited an hour and a half to put a 1 on this poll. This is your moment to shine. All the way up through 5. Definitely will attend again. We hope to see you again. And number 4, how did you find RfRx tonight? Was it through the RFR online community or Slack channel, which we mentioned earlier? Was it through a meetup event? Was it through Facebook, X, or Instagram? Was it through Discord or the RFR website or something else? So I will leave that up for a little bit. And on that note, let's bring on the fabulous Gayle to close us out for the evening. Gayle, welcome.
Thank you, Cara, for those lovely words. Thank you, everyone, for being here. David, another outstanding presentation. Sometimes when you do the philosophy ones, I just hang on and try to see if I can't get through the whole ride. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our usual team, Cara and Helen. Helen, she'll maybe hear this in the recording. We miss you at the tail end. And to Nikki and Glenda, our support people. And then we have lots of folks, and Jason, we have lots of folks behind the scenes that help us put this podcast in different places, and we're grateful to them too. But mostly, we're grateful for all of you for attending tonight. We just love seeing you here from week to week. It's been 3.5 years that we've been doing this, and we have become so accustomed to gathering on these Monday night get-togethers, and I appreciate everybody giving us a few hours and playing along and being part of what we call the RfR extended family. So thank you, everybody, for giving us your Monday evening. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I was going to mention, and I was going to mention, we don't want to jump over Halloween too quickly, but we're coming into November, which is the season of giving. And so give some thought to Giving Tuesday. I've had more cats in here tonight than I usually do, but they've been coming and going. Giving Tuesday's coming up. If you would like to partner with us as a $4 a month donor or $8 a month donor or a one-time donor, we would love to do that too. That makes you part of the family as well, because it's those dollars that get this in the front of folks who need to know that we're here and that a Monday night RfRx would be available to them. And so a lot of that effort and that budget goes into letting folks know that we're here, whether that's through our social media, our appearances on podcasts, any other creative things we do, like a billboard occasionally, or whatever else it is we do. We appreciate your partnering with us as donors. Everybody enjoy the hangout. I know we throw words around here at Recovering from Religion. There's a hangout, and then there's a support group, and there's the Monday night, and then there's RfRx. And so if you have any questions about that, anytime you have questions about anything, you can go right to the helpline chat. It's there for support, but you can always go and ask questions. And said, I was at the Monday night meeting and they said something about a hangout, but then they said a support group, and understand that those are two entirely different things. The format for our support groups is much more about support group. It's peer support. It is based around recovering from religion. There's a moderator, a support group leader. Everybody has an opportunity to share. Our hangouts are a lot less formal. They're this thing that we have following the RfRx meeting. So if you're confused about any of those things because we've jumped over them so quickly, don't hesitate to go to recoveringfromreligion.org, click on the chat, and ask any of our agents. They'd be glad to clarify that for you. And if you'd like to be a member of our online community, where those chats can also happen on a chat level, not in a Zoom meeting, on a chat level, we'd love to have you in there too. So I hope I have confused everything as much as possible. Thank you again, everybody, for coming, and I'll look to see you next week. Happy Halloween!